Welcome, 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 and welcome back for some of you. Today is Sunday, January the 30th, 2022, and we are in for a very good and dynamic conversation titled How to Critique the Critique, Conscious Community, and Hebrew Edition. And so, I will be doing these series of, informing the communiversity, the Independent African Academy is what we call it, uh, methods and strategies on how to look at and assess work. And so, some of these guides and techniques are learned as part of the standard procedures, especially in graduate school, on how to look at and assess information. But sometimes, a lot of us don't have those opportunities to be able to evaluate scholarship on an academic level. And so, we are collectively, just enthusiasts or, looking towards getting into these various fields. And, we're just looking for a way to uh, make sure that the information that we are assessing on our journey to our own self perfection is of quality. And so, a lot of people coming into consciousness, uh, and there are a lot of people coming, each and every day. They may not be aware of, quality control and how they can be their own quality control. So this conversation is, a part of that dialogue. So the first one had to deal with an academic critique, using linguistics in terms of some critiques made against Dr. Shekanta Diop and Dr. Theophilo Benga. And today we turn our attention to the quote unquote conscious community. And so, as a case study, we're going to examine a critique given by our good brother Zion Lex. And, he is of the Hebrew Israelite community. He does a lot of presentations attempting to connect Sumer with Israel, and, you know, very controversial figure in the online conscious community. And so, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, I did two presentations on the possible African origin of the god Yahweh. And I did a follow-up, not necessarily a follow-up. I did a kind of a summary later, probably like 2 days later after the second video, on our good brother Sonetter's channel. And so Zion Lex, I don't know if he saw it live or if he, was informed about the conversation and then, caught the archive. Either way, he decided that, at least according to his words, 24 hours later, he was going to respond to uh, my commentary on the African origin and Egyptian origin, more specifically, of the god Yahweh. And so, he made his critique. Some people sometime later informed me. I had a chance to view most of it. And, I wasn't surprised at all of, what was said and the quality of what was said. However, and in most instances, I do not respond to, uh, videos made, because one is made almost every week, by someone about based on something I've said. And in most instances, the people who do the critiques, uh, aren't. aren't students of the field in which they're making the critique, and if they are, they're for the most part enthusiasts but not scholars, in the field. And so, you have a lot of kind of, you if you go back and forth with folks, it just be endless back and forth videos. And so, I got too much going on to kind of respond to every video. But since I was doing the how to critique the critique series, I decided as part of that conversation to use this most recent example, because these works that I mentioned on the first part of the series, were scholarship against texts that were written, 1977 and 1993 respectively. And so this is something that just happened recently. And so this just gives us a fresh opportunity. So we're going to use uh, the Zion Lex uh, rebuttal, and I put that in quotes, as a case study for our conversation. And so, we'll get to all of that and more when we return in just a moment. And welcome back. Welcome back. This is part 2 of our conversation today. And, for those of you who are just joining us, I forgot to mention that we did a part 1 earlier today. And so we took about an hour break. And now we're getting ready for part 2. And so that's what this is. So, as always, I like to start with a few announcements. Just want to remind everyone who is listening that the West Africa and beyond ancient Nubian and Egyptian interconnections with the Niger Valley and Atlantic World Conference, online conference, an international conference, from African scholars from Africa proper, the continent of Africa, Europe, and the United States will be presenting. And you can go to West Africa and Beyond, or excuse me, westafricabeyond.org to learn more and to purchase your tickets. So there's $35 a day. It's going to be on, I think it's Wednesday and Thursday, the February 15th and 16th of 2022. So I am one of the presenters, and it's a powerhouse of scholars. Believe me, you do want to attend both days. And speaking of conferences, there is a second conference. And so in just a few days after the conference on the 18th, I, along with a few hundred individuals from the United States, Africa, and Europe, uh, will be heading to Egypt to the what we call the One Africa Returning to the Source tour, and is going to be held from the 18th to the 28th of February. And there's going to be a conference at that on that tour. This is being put together by the brother Taki Grant, who is the main producer of the film Hoppy, how economics and its role um, in the development of civilization. And the documentary film, which I'm also a part of, also has a long list of heavy hitters and scholars who have contributed to it. And some of those scholars who are in the film are going to be presenting at the conference. And so the conference will be streamed live. So to find out more information on how you can get tickets for the live stream is going to be at happyfilm.com, HAPIFILM.com. And so going to be there is Anthony Browder. Uh, who else? It's hard for me to read. Dr. Bayena Bello, Professor James Smalls, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, the wife of Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Dr. Solange Ashby, who's an Egyptologist and nubiologist, and our good brother Jabari Osazi, who will be hosting the event on the 25th and 26th, as well as Dr. Joyce King, very, very well-known educator, and Dr. Vera Nobles. You may know her husband, who will also be there, Dr. Wade Nobles. And Mfudishi Jehudi Mess will be there. Myself, Brother Asarimhotep, and the legendary Dr. Teofile Obinga. So it's going to be a very, very powerful event. So make sure that you go to hoppyfilm.com and purchase your tickets. And so with that said, again, the topic of the discussion, this is part 2, how to critique, the conscious community in Hebrew edition. So there was a lot of groundwork that was set up in the first video. So if you are just joining us, you will have to at some point review the first part to really kind of get where we're going here. So this is just a continuation. So I didn't want to make a 5 or 6 hour long video. I just decided to break it up into 2 different conversations. So hopefully it's digestible. And so without further ado, I want to thank everyone who have made themselves known in the chat, and welcome back a few of you. Peace and blessings to JC Hughes. Sister Tamika is in the building, and yes, thumb up and like the video. Vyasa Gullah is in the place. Ankoma Dejed and Brother Conan Lee, thank you for joining. Teti Ursamaat Ra Seneferu is in the building, and Robert Rand is in the building. So peace and blessings, and of course, all of you who are watching live on Facebook on the asarimhotep.com, on the asarimhotep Facebook page. And, StreamYard is now allowing for us to stream on YouTube. So this is simultaneously streaming on the YouTube page. So as of right now, they can't make comments and they'll show up on the back end. But if you are watching, and or whatnot, you can either hop over here to YouTube or whatnot. You can stay there and watch. I just want to say thank you, saying for joining the conversation. So some more have made themselves known. Amin Min Ra Suit Atom is in the building. Peace and blessings to Dr. Duarte Odara. Brother Garfield Podcast is in the building. And I think that was it. So if I missed anyone, I do apologize, and I'll try to shout you out later. So let me get started. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and just pick up where we left off in the first video. So for a little bit of context, again, Zionlex made a video response to my Yahweh conversation on Sinetta. And when I had an opportunity to look at the video, I was highly disappointed, not surprised, but still, I'm like, in 2022, these people are still making these rookie mistakes. But I'm not surprised at all. about Zion Lex, and because I'm kind of used to his level of scholarship, and which is why on a normal basis I wouldn't respond, because it's normally a waste of time. But since I actually have time today, and it was just a perfect opportunity given the nature of the series that we're doing. I decided, for the heck of it, that I give a response. So so the first part already happened. And so we went through a number of his statements. I won't be able to go through them all. He did like an hour and a half video. And so to respond to each comment and statement, it'll just be too much. So I'm just picking some of the more important ones that he was making, and and that's what I'm responding to. So continuing, I'm gonna just start. We ended on the notes of why or where we're getting the basis of the name Set and Yahweh. So what the essential argument is that Yahweh is not a Semitic word, it's not a Semitic name. And Semitic scholars have been trying for over 100 years to figure out what the name Yahweh means. And every which way that they turn, they are kind of all over the place. And it's a lot of folk etymology going on, even from the professional theologians. And so when you have a case like this, one of the things that you would do is to try to look for the name in an unrelated language amongst a group of people who they have interacted with, knowingly throughout their history. And so, not one study to my knowledge has attempted to answer the etymological question of the name Yahweh amongst the Hebrews through the Egyptian language. And there are several reasons why this may be, because of course, a lot of the scholarship is done by believers of the Bible. And so they don't want to believe that, something as major as the God Yahweh uh, originates amongst a pagan group that is vilified in the text. And then there's also racism, white supremacy, that they don't even just there's some authors that just don't even believe that the influence like that would come from Africa on the Hebrews in this major way. And so this is why it is important to at least explore the option and to see where the evidence leads us. And so the framework is, and the argument is, that the name Yahweh is a loan, is a borrowing into language, that it was a name that was adopted by nomadic herders and warriors. And these folks settled amongst the Israelites and the Canaanites, and they in turn adopted the deity and integrated it, not as a separate deity, but as just another title or aspect for El in the text, right? So, uh, and so what I argue in addition to that is that the name Yahweh ultimately is a epithet or a secondary name for the god Set that you see over here on the left hand side in the color, and the god Apep Apophis, is known in the Greek, and that all of the characteristics that are associated with Yahweh are associated with Set. And even in the biblical times, the biblical authors recognize, and the culture itself recognize, the commonality between Yahweh and Set. and in addition to that, Baal. And so there was an intimate relationship between these three deities in the Levant. And this is something that scholars have noted, and I've already cited them in my presentations, the very presentations that Lying Zion Lex has not watched, but um, that has already been recognized by scholars. And however, because they're going strictly off of the name Set, they haven't thought of looking at his other names and to see if that in fact uh is possibly where the borrowing came from. And so in I did two videos on Yahweh, and the second video, I go more into the linguistic aspect and I show the relationship that this quote unquote deity is a common African deity. And one of its manifestations, we know them as Ogun among the Yoruba. And so that aspect of the conversation is going to be reinforced in this conversation with some additional notes to address some of the arguments and the claims made by Zion Lex in his rebuttal. And at the same time, I'm going to be addressing some other issues in the conscious community that this conversation helps to illuminate as well. So, regardless of how the conversation came about in terms of Zion Lex and the whole Sonnetter deal, it's just a good conversation to have, and I'm presenting some information. I'm in the middle of writing a text, so all of this is coming and will be organized with more detail and more structure and rigor in the actual text itself. So this is stuff that I've kind of written on over the years, but now there's going to be a dedicated journal article and or slash book on this very topic today. So, of course, Yahweh being a composite of conceptualizations, which include a storm god, a warrior deity, and a god of earthquakes and other devastation, right? Which is why the kind of character he has. He's very violent. Like, his only solution to anything in the Old Testament is to kill people. Like, every solution that he has involves killing somebody. And that's what you would expect from a deity that is, a volcanic storm deity, right? And so Yahweh, in this bar argument, is just the Hebrews version of Zeus and Set, And so this is kind of a modern drawing on the right hand side, because Black Hebrew Israelites believe that Jesus the Christ was black, and he was not, and they can't read. But that's another story, because they mistake the verse that says, when John has the vision of allegedly of Christ, that when it says his hair was white like wool, they interpret that to mean wool texture, when the actual statement is white like wool, and then it says white like snow. It's given a color descriptive, an adjective, to describe the color of the hair, not the texture. And then of course there's the skin as of bronze, has it been burnt in the furnace, and then his eyes are red. And so in the first video we discussed that is a common color association for storm gods in East Africa and the Middle East, right? Even in Nigeria, amongst Hausa speaker and other Chadic speakers. So it's a common theme, because they initially they were appealed to for rain, and so they're black because of their association with storm clouds to bring about rain. So, that's the kind of historical uh that's kind of the historical thing. So I've also interspersed these conversations with these aspects of common things that you find with people in the conscious community. And one of them is that, as I have labeled here, and I assign this to Zion Lex as well, is that they don't listen to arguments, and they make up their own arguments just to argue against what they made up in their head. So you're clearly saying one thing, but they hear something totally different, and they will restructure your argument or just make up like Zion did. Watch the first video so you can see how many things he just made up out of the blue, and then made an argument in the whole video for it. And he's going to try to explain it away, but we have the video, so it is what it is. And so it's like, for instance, this is a screenshot of Zion Lex uh, taking a screenshot of part of the slides that I was showing on Soneta's program. And so you can see Zion Lex's kind of thumbnail up here on the right hand side, and at the bottom you can see his scrolling thing telling you to support and hit the like button. And so what he tries to do is he spent a whole bunch of time uh, on this slide. And so I introduce here in this slide Dr. Ben's text, Black Man of the Nile and His Family. And on page 344, Dr. Ben talks about, he makes the argument that Yahweh was a minor ancient Egyptian deity, and which he traced to the 26th dynasty. And I state here that he doesn't provide a source for the text. So this is my screen of the my slide of the screen screenshot that you just saw, so you can see down here clear. So this is, if you can't read the hieroglyphs, this is E or Y, and then this is the an H, a kind of guttural H with the dot that we were representing. We were represented as an H with a dot under it in terms of our transliteration, and this is the W sign, a quail chick. And so these last three hieroglyphs that you see at the bottom are what we call, is commonly called a determinative, but these are really classifiers, because they belong to categories, and they're letting you know what categories, what classes that the word, which these are represented phonetically on this side here, belong to. And so this chassid glyph right here informs you that this is referring to a foreign uh entity or foreign place. And this is a standard, and this is the last icon is a deity, a Netcher symbol, which is a seated man with a beard, and he has like a long head cloth on, a standard shepherd's head cloth. And so for him, allegedly, I didn't go through this a long time, so this is supposed to indicate that uh that Yahweh was a foreign deity. So what he's trying to argue is that Yahweh is an indigenously Semitic deity, and that the record, he's using this to argue that that is found in the Egyptian hieroglyphs, but it is referring to an indigenously foreign deity. And my argument is the exact opposite. Because if you followed our conversation about Set, you know that he is a deity that is native to Egypt, but he represents the border, like he's a deity of all the borders, like all the border towns and things, that is where they would have military garrisons. The one of the patron deities for those military garrisons and border facilities would be the god Set. And so, and he was also associated with various different deities of foreign people. And so, and this is partially because the Egyptians viewed the foreigners, from all directions in many respects as enemies and or sources of chaos. And so Set represents that spirit of chaos in amongst the living groups that exist outside of Egypt who don't adhere to the values and things of Egyptian culture. So that's what is being represented, not that it is a foreign god. And so here's a scan of the original document of Black Man in the Nile and His Family by Dr. Ben. So you can see, this kind of hand drawn in thing here. And so at this part of the book, they're doing a question and answer. And so somebody asked the question, how did the ancient Africans of Egypt write Jehovah? And so Dr. Ben answers, the strangest chain of events in Egyptian religious history is topped by the 26 dynasties divine emblem of the figure of one of the gods named Yahweh, right? Written in hieroglyph as this. He says the first four letters mean divinity. And the last is a picture of the God himself. And you got to remember that Dr. Ben didn't read hieroglyphs. So he's just all off. And so the first the first three glyphs are the actual glyphs that represent the sounds of the language. There's only 6 glyphs. And so the last 3 glyphs, this sign here at the top is just a series of mountains in sequence, and represents the kind of other or foreign, or that which is beyond the borders of Egypt, right? What is over the horizon. And then of course the last 2 glyphs, the one under the mountains and the seated man itself, is the so-called determinatives or the classifiers that represent the divine, right? And this last picture is not of the god Yahweh. That's just a standard hieroglyphic glyph to represent the class of deity, right? So he's incorrect here. He says, note that the Egyptian god was adopted by the Harabu, the Hebrews, colloquially the Jews, in their own mythology about the creation of the world. Yahweh was the name of the very minor god, equally Amen, who later became the Amen at the end of the most Jewish and Christian prayers and hymns. And so he makes this common mistake. So when people believe that the word Amen is also at the end of the prayers amongst the Jews and Christians, that the Egyptian god Amen is at the end of the prayers, that is incorrect. They're two semantically and conceptually different concepts. However, they are related. And matter of fact, I deal with that in this book here, Chiluba Maweja, Yoruba Orisha, and Ancient Egyptian Ak, an exploratory etymological story. And you'll find in the appendix the conversation on that, which shows that they are related concepts, but it's not the god Amen that you're referring to at the end of the prayer. So he's also incorrect on. Matter of fact, this whole thing is just incorrect. This whole conversation in page 344, Dr. Ben. We love Dr. Ben, but this whole thing is off. So it is what it is. But I mentioned this in my conversation and show that there's other forms of the word. So because he couldn't find a source, I went into other dictionaries to find the source. And And so you see this is actually a form of tho, right? This form here. And you find it in two forms. So Yahweh and the Yahim, right? And then I put on the slide here. Remember that this aspect of the slide is from my 2011 and 2014 publications on where I discuss Yahweh in those early texts that I mentioned in the first video. So I stayed here in which this was actually a footnote. The Egyptian variant Yahim sounds close to the Hebrew name Jahim, that is alleged to mean raised up. One source argues that it is Arabic and means to light and to stir up a fire, to stare with sharp eyes, with a pit with blazing fire. The word Ajham is to mean someone with red eyes. More investigation is needed here. These meanings would fit in nicely with a deity associated with a volcano or storms. See next footnote and compare to Egyptian him, be burning, be hot, to burn without the J prefix. So I'm setting up the conversation. So notice what is titled: sound change, M and W. And so I show here in the Egyptian language that the M and the W represent the same phoneme, that they're allophonic, and that in one dialect they may say M, and then in another dialect they may say W. So you see these two forms of the same word, and sometimes there might be some semantic slippage or semantic shading, as we would call it, with the new form of the word. But these are variations on the stuff. So you see the interchange of M and W in Egyptian. Then I go and show this same thing in amongst the Hebrew. So one of the sources that I used was Hebrewisms of West Africa. And so remember that when I was discussing this in 2014, that I was showing how because it was suggested in a couple of texts that I cited that the god Nyame was a variation of the word Yahweh, indigenously Yahweh. And so um, I cite this text as just one of the many sources that tried to make this argument. And so in it, it says the Ashanti and Yame is but another form of the Hebrew Yahweh. And then it continues. Professor Clay, who assures us that in the Marushu archives found in Nippur, belonging to the reigns of Artaxerxes and Darius, the divine element in Hebrew name is written as Ja'ama for Yahweh. Clay also mentions a tablet at Tanakh, which contains the divine name of Israel's God name, uh, or Israel's God written as Jami. And so I'm showing here that even within the Hebrew text, the M and W are interchanging in various forms of the same divine name, just as you see here in the Egyptian, right? So this is the whole point of the conversation. And so I show here and I continue the conversation and explain who Professor Clay is that was cited in the text, and show that they're citing this book, The Empire of the Amorites. And then I go into page 54 and show that he says some Semites use M and others W to represent the same sound. So that's what we call in linguistics a phoneme, which is a kind of a group of sounds that can stand for each other in a word, and there is no change in meaning, right? And more properly, that's an allophone, right? So, and then I show you here how the J, which is a Y sound. This is just the way we transliterate the reed glyph. The reed glyph. Let me go back and show you the reed glyph. So this first glyph right here is we transliterate it using the English letter J, but this is represents in either an E, or we write it as I or Y sound. So you don't read this as Jahi, but it's Yahi or Yahi, Yahu, Yahu, Yahim, Ihim. Yahi, you know. So that's how you read that. So the transliteration of that glyph also interchanges with W. And so you can see it in these examples here, right? So that's part of that. So when we're having the conversation, remember that I said in the first video that Set is who he is because there are various different words that are pronounced similarly that they combined to uh give a kind of overall composite of Set. And Set, we got to understand, like amongst the Egyptians, Horus and Osiris, Horus is or Heru's father, Osir, they are the patron saint and the spirit of agriculture and farmers and urbanization. However, Set is the patron deity of all the pastoralists and the soldiers. And this is a Fulani who roams and moves up and down the all across Africa, in the Sahel and in the northern part, even going into the Middle East. And so, one good text to have, do I have it on me? And, he writes a lot. This is Dr. Abou Boukri Moussalam. And, he writes in French, and this is the Pass of the Nile, the relationship between ancient Egypt and Black Africa. And he discusses in this text, he has another text called the Egyptian origin of the pool. And the pool is just another variation of the word Fulani, just like Poro or Puolo, and just like Iberi or Hebrew. They're all the same group of individuals, who have roamed. But what a lot of people don't realize is that they were also metallurgists. And what they would do is develop, just go between mines and mine ore, and they would make, instruments and implements and sell them wherever they went. And so that's what these groups are. And so Set became the patron saint of pastoralists and metallurgists and craftsmen. And that's another reason why he's associated with foreigners, because they made a distinction between those people who settled, like of course in Egypt, and then those people who roamed around like cattle. Those were the foreigners. Those are the people who have no home. They don't settle in a place. So we see these characteristics of Set, and we have this, Hawi, Hai, and we can see that even in this text here, the Y and the W interchange here. And so to beat, strike, smite, clap, thresh, repress. And then in its nominal form, it means soldier, combatant, beater, herdsman, because even the herdsmen beat their cattle to get them going in a certain direction. That's a typical action of a herdsman. And you got to understand that Set is also named after the bow and arrow. Like there's a whole place called Ta Seti. That's where he's from. The land of the bow, the land of warriors. And these are just other names for those people. And this is going to become very important. And so we can see that same Y and W interchange. You see the double read here, the Y and W interchange here, even in the word for flood. And you see how this reduplicates? This is how we get Hawa and Yahweh. because of the reduplication and then the falling off of the final semi-vowel consonant W here. And so all the forms in the Hebrew can be explained easily in the Egyptian. And so, continuing with Zion Lex, another issue that you're going to come across in the conscious community is that you'll be arguing with people who don't understand the subject matter and just start talking about anything. And when you trap them into a corner, they'll try to redirect the conversation and make it seem like they were talking about their new redirected conversation as if this is what we've been talking about all along. And that's my prediction for when Zion Lex wants to rebuttal with another video in 24 hours, in response to these videos that I've made today. He still is not going to understand the subject matter, and he's just going to start talking about anything and try to redirect the conversation to something totally different and try to make it as if this is what he's been talking about all along and this is what he meant. I've been doing this too long. They're predictable. And I guarantee you this is exactly what he's going to do. And so in the second video, as I stated before, I showed you how the cognate for Yahweh or Yahi or Iyahu in even the Egyptian is cognate with the word Ogun. And hold on one second as I take a step. And I hope y'all are, still with me and enjoying. I know y'all could be listening to Kevin Samuels, but you chose to stay here with me. So I appreciate each and every one of you. And while y'all are doing what you do, make sure that each and every one of you just go ahead and that is right. Subscribe, hit the like button, and make sure that you share this video. Make sure you share with all your Hebrew friends, all your Christian friends, your Christian pastors and Judaic pastors, everybody. Zion Lex was talking about, because he was in the chat room, of course, and he was talking about my measly 6,500 some odd subscribers. So he said, no one listened to me with my small ass subscribership. So let's change that. Share the video, make sure that you like and subscribe, and let's get the followers up. So and please recommend to all the Hebrews so they can see when they can get the notices when they about to get this work, on in these YouTube streets, as we would say. So thank you, Zion Lex. And so, help me, get at least 10,000 subscribers so that we can, wreak havoc and just rain terror on those who have declared intellectual jihad on intelligence and, of course, African people. And so we will continue on with our conversation. I think I'm going to do full screen for the rest of the presentation. But as I noted in the previous conversation, that Yahweh is also, cognate with Ogun, and that there is a native version of Yahweh amongst the Hebrews, but they demoted him and just made him Cain or Cain. And so we got to remember that, Cain is connected to the Kenites. Um, and, they're the ones that allegedly supposed to have brung Yahweh into the picture. And so we're going to get into all of that. And so as I noted from the previous previous conversation, that this is my proposal, that Hebrew Yahweh or Yahweh is cognate with Yoruba Ogun. And I have in red the correspondences here. So HGWN, the patron saint of this. Both deities associated with violence, war, and destruction. Their historical relationship adds clarity to the conception of another ancient Egyptian deity, which I discussed as Sekhmet. And so we won't get into Sekhmet today. But what what is part of this conversation, which I've discussed in many other publications, is the role of the then Green Sahara. And even Dr. Modupe Oduyoye in his text argues from this when he's making his comparison. So what is essentially what you're seeing here is kind of a graphic reconstruction of the quote unquote Green Sahara, and which started drying up around 6,500 BCE, in between like 8,000 and 600, 5,000, excuse me, 6,500 BCE, all the way up until, the beginning of Pharaonic times. And, during this period, when the floods, excuse me, when the monsoon rains would come from the Indian Ocean, it used to go all the way up here to the northern part of Africa. But at the end of the ice age and the melting of the polar ice caps, the that melting process withdrew the moisture from this region, and that's what caused the desertification of the Sahara. So we have evidence that there were a series of lakes and travelable rivers, and that there was no privileged place in these areas. And so because it was savannas and wetlands, the herds would come through. You had pastoral groups that that would roam. And actually it's more so because of the desertification that really pastoralism takes off in Africa. And this is your origin of pastoralism. And these pastoralists move all back and forth from the Middle East to West Africa in these various different stages. So all of this starts to dry up, and in this time period, in that vast time period, the ancestors of both, for example, the Yoruba people, the ancient Egyptians, and the Semites existed in this Green Sahara. And as a result of the desertification, it pushed, everyone that survived in all directions. And it is this desertification that fueled the populating of the Nile Valley, because all the rivers are drying up, all the lakes are drying up. Everyone is migrating until they hit a viable river. And so some of them who was in the Central Sahara migrated and settled around the Niger Bend, and others settled in Lake Chad. Others went further down to the Benue, and others kept going and ended up in the Congo. Others moved east, and some went under down here into the Sudan and settled in these areas. Others went straight into the Nile River. I don't think they went this way kind of in the desert. What they did was they followed the coast. So they went up, followed the coast, and some landed in the Delta area, and then others continued to move on into the Levant. And what my work has shown, and in Bowley's and GJK Campbell Dunn and others, is that there were African groups who migrated during that time and after, who came and intermingled and settled in the Levant area. And it is those long-term interactions in those spaces that Proto-Semitic language emerges. And the last remnant of those Africans, this is my argument, and others' argument as well, that that last remnant of those that migrated out of here through the um, through the Nile River Valley and the excuse me, and the Delta area, ended up in Iraq, and they became the Sumerians. And but there were already people in the Middle East, already nomadic roamers that used to just go back and forth here, and they too were affected by the desertification, because all of this was pushing people in all kinds of directions. And so, so you're having these Africans coming and settling amongst people who already lived there, who didn't speak Semitic languages. But Semitic develops as a result of their long-term interactions, so-called Proto-Semitic. And so this is our central argument. So this kind of sets the backdrop, which I also discussed in the first video, for what we're about to talk about now. So this is important information just to know when discussing African history in general. And so, who is Ogun? Ogun is the Yoruba patron saint of blacksmiths, and also of kingship and metallurgy. And so, a popular book uh on the god Ogun is called Africa's Ogun, Old World and New. It is edited by Sandra T. Barnes. And on page 107, the author states that, Ogun represents war, violence, and destruction. So we can already see that these are the major characteristics that you also see with Yahweh, you also see with Baal, and you also see with the god Set, whose other name is Yahweh or Yahoo, right? So, um, coming from another conversation, as I stated, as Barnes 1997 page 2 notes concerning Ogun, there are two aspects of Ogun: as a violent warrior. So warriorship is part of this. So remember that the pastoralists were recruited to become any citizens warriors, because they were the blacksmiths who made the weapons. So this is going to become very important. Fully armed and laden with frightening charms and medicines to kill his foes. And two, as a leader known for his sexual prowess, who nurtures, protects, and relentlessly pursues truth, equity, and justice. Right. So there's kind of two aspects to him. And it says here as a leader, but in other parts of the text, it more so talks about kingship. So he has to deal with royalty, kingship, rulership, and that aspect of rule has to be ready for war at any given moment, because the king is the protector. And you even see that manifested in the stories of of Horus and Set, because there are two aspects of leadership, right, of kingship. And so you have another entity that goes by the name of Aganju. And the word Aganju is two words. The first word is Agan, meaning barren, and you have Ju in Juju, meaning darkness or void. And with the prefix, it means jungle, but it's also cognate with Middle Egyptian Ju, meaning mountain. And so it is used in the sense of wilderness. And so the Aganju means an uninhabited tract of country, wilderness, plain, desert, or forest. This Agan barren it's built off of the same GN root for which the word Ogun is built from, because this GN root derives from a root meaning fire. And so it is fire. Then the next semantic lane is dryness, and dust, and then of course deserts wilderness, any place that's kind of empty and barren, where life is not thriving, so to speak, or is just unlivable. So, a mountain is unlivable. A forest, although it is full of life, for the most part, you can't build a civilization inside of a forest. Now, there are people who live in forests, but they're in these small hunter-gatherer bands, not people who are trying to, build high rises in subway trains and all that, because you can't build civilization inside of the forest. And so that's why it is also considered a wilderness. It's an uninhabitable place. But a Ganju, like uh Baal and Yahweh, is also associated with uh violent storms and volcanoes, but more so a volcano in the sense in leukemia. So Aganju is also the lord of caves and owns mineral wealth. That's going to be very important when we have the discussion about mining, because the reason why the volcano is the symbol of metallurgists is because the volcano is the natural forge in nature. We create forges to produce metal. They both heat up and shape rocks. That's the connection between the volcano and the deities. And we'll see this play out. And so I said, he's a volcano deity. He's not a volcano deity among the Yoruba. But when they brought him to the new land and they, dealt with volcanoes, it was associated with a volcano. And this is important for us to understand, because as I don't think that Set himself is associated with a volcano. However, because the principle has to deal with fire and its semantic derivations, once it comes across an aspect that in the minds of the people can be associated with fire and its effects, they will use that label with that phenomenon. So, for example, in modern Yoruba land, Ogun is associated with traffic lights, computer software, and all kinds of electronic devices. Why? Because they all run on fire. And so they don't use our word indigenously for electricity. They have no word for that. It's all fire. Sun, fire. Lightning, fire. Fire, fire. Lava, fire. Anything that uses fire can take on the attributes, the conceptual attributes of fire. So we see in this same way that this word Aganju, this label Aganju for a deity, when it was transported as a result of the slave holocaust, it was applied to a volcano in the same way that when those desert nomads adopted Set as their deity using the name Yahu or Yahoo, they also applied it to volcanoes. And so he's a god of untamed lands, just like Set. He's on the border, and Set is also the deity of the desert, just like Aganju, and creator of civilization, defender of the oppressed. Again, warrior, metallurgist. He's a warrior king, just like Ogun, and known for his legendary strength. And so we find that same thing amongst the Greeks, amongst the deity they call Hephaestus, who is the god of blacksmiths and fire, called the celestial artificer. He was also associated with other craftsmen, sculptors, carpenters, metalworkers, and as evident in the name of his Roman counterpart, Vulcan, with volcanoes. Even though an ugly god lame by his mother, he was the husband of none other than Aphrodite herself. So you can see how the volcanoes, in all the situations, the volcanoes are associated with metallurgy. This is going to become very, very important when we start talking about the Kenites, who are supposed to be the bringers of Yahweh to Israel, right? And so this is a represent, a kind of represent. So you see here on ancient Egypt, this looks similar to the Kim glyph, right? That is supposed to be, or at least one aspect of it, representative of the forge. You can see they're doing metallurgy here. It's actually a bigger image, but I wanted to had to cut it off in half so we can see here. So they're making copper implements, right? And then you can see, oh, sorry, then you can see these other Africans here with a larger uh smithy. But this is in fact our version of a volcano. And so when he's associated with the volcano, there's the aspects of a real volcano and then our man-made volcano, which we use to make metal instruments, right? So I introduced this text, Genesis, by Gerhard von Rad, right? And he's talking about the book Genesis of the Bible. So he's a biblical scholar. And in this, because we already mentioned, because Zion Lex, lying Zion Lex, uh, tried to make it seem like he was schooling me on the Kenites and the role of these nomadic pastoralists. And we already cited different things that mention that in the two conversations that we had prior to this conversation that we're having today. And then I showed earlier that I've been having this conversation and these associations with Yahweh in written form, at least going back to 2011. But because Zion Lex, was just in such a rush to make a response video, he didn't know these things because he's not a scholar and he doesn't do proper literature review. He thinks because he got all the time in the world because he has no purpose, no greater purpose in his life, that he can just, that a response video made 24 hours later was going to be meaningful. But I move on. So I have highlighted here, it has long been known that Cain cannot be separated from the tribe of the Kenites, often mentioned in the Old Testament. Cain is the embodiment of the ancestors of the Kenites, and therefore it is scarcely thinkable that the Yahwist, in whose time the Kenites still existed, was not also thinking in his story about Cain of this tribe and its curious fate. The Kenites were a difficult riddle to the Israelites. They too, like the Israelites, were worshipers of Yahweh, perhaps even before Israel. I'm talking about the Kenites. Their relatives, the Rechabites, were even especially fanatic zealots of Yahweh, coming themselves from the south. They had indeed joined the desert wandering of the Israelites, but they never really achieved a sedentary life. And so, I have this highlighted here because again, you got to check the first foundational video where this where we have citations showing that the Kenites were existing, roaming back and forth between Egypt and the Negev in the Levant. But they originate from the south. They originate in in the kind of Sinai area. And actually, we'll get into it. I don't want to get it ahead. And so, when you want to know more about the Kenites, there are some other texts that give some other fascinating information that's going to ultimately become relevant for us. So this is just a Britannica online uh, encyclopedia, right? So this is just a screenshot from what I, copied and pasted into this next slide. So it says Kenite, member of a tribe of itinerant metalsmiths related to the Midianites, and we'll get into who the Midianites are, and the Israelites who plied their trade while traveling in the region of Araba, in other words, Arabia, the desert rift valley extending from the Sea of Galilee to the Gulf of Aqaba. From at least the 13th century to the 9th century BC, the Kenites' name was derived from Cain, whose descendants they were believed to be. The Kenites are mentioned several times in the Old Testament. The father-in-law, Moses, Jethro, was a Kenite and a priest leader of the tribe he led in the worship of Yahweh, whom Moses later revealed to the Hebrews as their own God, whom they had forgotten. In the period of the Judges, it was a Kenite woman, Jael, who killed the general of Israel's enemies, the Canaanites. Settling among the Israelites, the Amalekites, and the Canaanites, the Kenites apparently became absorbed into the tribe of Judah. Conservative groups of Kenites retained their nomadic way of life and beliefs, practices, however, and one such group, the Rechabites, fought alongside the rebel and future king of Israel, Jehu, against the Omri dynasty and the worshippers of the Canaanite god of Baal. And so they connect the word Kenite with Cain. And the word Cain itself, again, is cognate with Ogun, and we went through that in the first video to show those correspondences. And so this, what I'm about to cite now, is from the Jewish Encyclopedia. And so they say regarding the Kenites, a tribe of Palestine, mentioned in the time of Abraham as possessing a part of the promised land. At the Exodus, it inhabited the vicinity of Sinai and Horeb, and to it belonged Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, in Exodus 3 and 1. Jethro is said to have been a priest of Midian and a Midianite. Hence, the conclusion seems justified that the Midianites and the Kenites are identical. The Kenites journeyed with the Israelites to Palestine, and their encampment, apart from the latter's, was noticed by Balaam. And what I argue here is that the Kenites are just like kind of like the Hapiru, right? Or the Iberi or the Fulani. These are adopted names which describe their primary occupation. And like the Midianites may have been there just, there or from Median, that's their name, that's their ethnic name, and that's why they're one and the same. But they're just known for their occupation, which have to be smithing, which is chayin in Arabic, which becomes chayin in Hebrew because they adopted it, and which became Cain in English, but which is Ogun in Yoruba land. And so, according to the critical interpretation of biblical data, the Kenites were a clan settled on the southern border of Judah, originally more advanced in art than the Hebrews, and from whom the latter learned much. And this is a very important citation because it tells you, how the flow of influence comes. The people who are more technologically and more culturally advanced have a greater influence on those who are not. The Hebrews, the Israelites, were still these kind of ravaging nomadic herdsmen who were not metallurgists. So they didn't have tools and instruments. They were still walking around with wooden sticks to fight off prey and things like that. Not until they got with the Kenites did they actually have the tools of civilization. And what I argue here is that these Kenites got the tools of civilization from the Egyptians. That these were people who were coming out of Arabia, coming back and forth out of Arabia, and was part of the mining industry for the Egyptians, and also volunteered to be part of the soldiers and warriors when the Egyptians needed them. Because when the Egyptians didn't have, quote unquote, a standing army, what they would do is recruit either conquered enemies and or just volunteers or groups of nomadic pastoralists, who would act as the army. And so this is very important. In the time of David, the Kenites were finally incorporated into the tribe of Judah. Their eponymous ancestor was Cain, to whose descendants J in Genesis 4 attributes the invention of the art of working bronze and iron, the use of instruments of music. And I'm going to, in the paper, I'm going to show how the music part is going to be so instrumental in connecting this group of people with the Oko Agun in Yoruba land. And so, etc. Sayce has inferred in Hastings Dictionary Bible that the Kenites were a tribe of smiths, a view which Jay's statements would lend support. And so we're talking about the J writers of the Bible, right? So Jethro, priest of Midian, father-in-law of Moses, and he said, we kind of went over that. This indicates the Kenites originally formed part of the Midianite tribe or tribes, according to the E writers, and Jethro initiates Moses and Aaron into the worship of Yahweh. Several modern scholars believe, in consequence of this statement, that Yahweh was a Kenite deity, and from the Kenites, through the agency of Moses, his worship passed to the Israelites. So you got to, I'm citing all of this to show where the influence. So if you know the story, Moses allegedly kills an Egyptian and flees, for 40 years. He marries a Midianite woman. And so what you're seeing here is that the father of the Midianite woman, according to the story, initiates Moses into the lore of Yahweh, of the metallurgist, right? And so now, since he's been initiated into that, he has a relationship now with Yahweh, and Yahweh tells him to go into Israel and tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And y'all know the rest of the history. So this is how they're creating this myth to introduce the relationship between the Israelites and the Kenites. All righty. So the Kenites then were a nomadic tribe, more advanced in the arts of life than Israel. Their habitat, according to the first biblical reference to them, was in the Sinaitic Peninsula. This is going to be important to be sought in Edom. And so this is important to the argument in opposition to Zion Lex, because Zion Lex made up an entire story trying to argue that I got my argument from this one online article that was published in 2018, when I've been talking about this stuff since 2011 in published form with these very citations. And so, when you don't understand the argument, you don't know where someone's coming from, just make something up and let's roll with that and hope nobody says something about it. That's the school of Zion Lex, right? So, and in part of them, Jethro and his family migrated with the Israelites to the neighborhood of Jericho, afterwards settled in the south of Judah, and were finally absorbed by that tribe. So as a result of them being absorbed amongst the Israelites, allegedly when they was coming all out of Egypt, they just followed them when they met them up in Sinai. Then that's when they brought Yahweh with them. And of course, they're creating this new allegedly monosyllabic monolithic religion, monastic religion. You can't have a separate Yahweh and then a separate El. So we're going to combine them and make them one deity. And we got to create a story of how, he was only known by these other names to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But I'm going to introduce myself now to y'all as Yahweh. You see how this happens? So there's an article, Who Were the Kenites, by Marlene E. Mondrian from the University of Pretoria, right? Let me see if there's anything on here. It says this article examines the Kenite tribe, particularly considering their importance as suggested by the Kenite hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, the Kenites and the Midianites were the peoples who introduced Moses to the cult of Yahwehism. before he was confronted by Yahweh from the burning bush. Scholars have identified the Cain narrative of Genesis 4 as the possible etiological legend of the Kenites, and Cain as the eponymous ancestor of these people. The purpose of this research is to blah, 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 blah. This was a screenshot. So let me continue here. So what this on page 415 of this conversation, we have this article analyzes available information concerning the origin of the Kenites, their lifestyle, and their religion, their particular occupations as cattle breeders and musicians who lived in tents, as well as their craft as metal workers and smiths, link them to the descendants of Cain. In Numbers 24, 21 through 22, the name Cain is specifically associated with the Kenites. Scholars have identified the Cain narrative of Genesis 4 as the possible etiological legend of the Kenites, and Cain as the eponymous ancestor of the people. The Kenites lived and roamed mainly in their peripheral area south of Palestine. According to particular texts in the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh came from certain regions south of Palestine. And so we saw in one source that they would go back and forth between Egypt and the Levant, and with using the word the Negev. And so in this source, they're mainly saying that they're staying in just to the south of Israel, but they're still roaming in this southern part. And we'll show some maps in a bit. And so evaluation of relevant biblical material supports the connection between Cain and the Kenites, and also leads some credibility to the scholar's proposal of advancing that Moses was introduced to the cult of Yahweh by the Kenites, right? And page 416 says the Kenites were a nomadic and semi-nomadic tribe of coppersmiths who inhabited the rocky country of Tel Arad, which was an important city in the eastern Negev. As early as the 13th century BC, they made their livelihood as metal craftsmen. And sorry, had a phone call. There may be some resemblance to modern Arab tribe, the Slav, who travel somewhat gypsy-like as smiths or tinkers. And I wanted to cite that there because as I stated, I'm arguing that these are Arabs, and we got to remember that the Arab. If you want to know what a classical Israelite looks like, look at the Arabs. They are Arabs. They're one and the same people. They just separated, a long time ago, and their dialects became distinct, and um, and so now they are, who they are. They're no different than the Yoruba and the Igbo people, who separated about 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, and now their languages are distinct, but they're essentially one and the same people, right? And this is a similar place. So these are Arabs, these Kenites. And so etymology of the word Kenite says during the latter part of the 19th century, in 1894, Bernard Stade identified the Cain narrative of Genesis 4 as the etiological legends of the Kenites. Okay, I'll skip down. And he says, when Eve conceived and bore Cain, she declared, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. This is a mistranslation. And it's a shame that, they kind of stop here in English, because this is a little bit of editing going on here. So you see the word that is capitalized as Lord here. This is the word Yahweh. And so when Eve conceived and bore Cain, she declared, I have given birth to a Yahweh. And this gives you a clue to what Yahweh is associated with. What she's saying here is that I've given birth to a metallurgist. I've given birth to a blacksmith. That's all a Yahweh is. It's a blacksmith. And so there's Yahweh the God, and then there's Yahweh Cain. But they're really, in essence, both the same thing. They won't know this because they're not historical comparative linguists. They won't know the connection between the two words. It's just like in the ancient Egyptian, you have Ra, and you have Atum, and you have Aten. All of those are the same deity. They're the same word historically, but those are the manifestations of different related language groups who converged and met on the Nile. And now there's this interrelation as if these are different deities. They're the same deity. And it's the same thing here in the Bible. So we can get into that another time. So the cane is a and they just mess up here too. The cane is a derivation from the word gotten or acquired, Kenite, which is no, because cane is not a Hebrew word. That's why when you look in the dictionaries, when it has cane, it's just cane. But the Arabs have the correct meaning. So when you look in the dictionaries, they have kayin, a smith, a blacksmith. That's what cane means. It's a blacksmith. The name recurs later in Numbers 24, 21, and 22 in the Oracle of Balaam. In the text, Cain or Kayin is associated with the Kenites. The name has its etymology in the root Kayin. The word means spear. No, it doesn't mean spear. That's a product. That's one product, but it means smith. A similar spelt root appears in the 5th century BCE South Arabian tribal clan and personal names. The root meaning smith is also found later in Aramaic and Arabic. In cognate Semitic languages, it means tinsmith or craftsman. And a kano is mentioned, which could refer to a spear or metal weapons in general. The name could also be related to Ugarit, kin, meaning reed or shaft. The name Cain likewise might be connected to Kayin, the Thamudic deity. It is uncertain whether there is any link between Kayin and the South Arabian deity Hanan or Kinan. In the genealogical list of antediluvian heroes, Kinan is named as the son of Enosh. Etymologically, the name could be derived from Cain with the diminutive ending of an. Kinan could be interpreted as meaning smith, javelin, a little cane. The Arabian Kinan was probably a patron deity for smiths and metalworkers. The only information, and it just goes on into the next page. Now, what's interesting about this is that, again, this is something that is very frustrating when you're reading biblical scholarship. They try to answer everything with the inner language, and you don't do that. You're going to have to find recourse into so even under the so-called Afro-Asiatic hypothesis, they didn't check any Chadic languages, they didn't check any Cushitic languages, they didn't check Egyptian, none of that, which could have gave clarity. And so that's why when I go into Egyptian, all of this is made easy. And so, continuing, scholars have suggested that the Kenites were a group of metalworkers who left the Hittite Empire with its downfall and introduced the art of metallurgy to the Israelites, which I doubt. And so Hittites are Indo-Europeans. No, that's the Hittites. I'm sorry. No, the Hittites is still Semitic speakers. But it's like, no, it's not Semitic. Because it comes ultimately out of a word for craftsmanship and copper and all of that, which comes out of Egypt. And these people were employed by Egyptians in the mines. And so this is going to be important for another discovery, which we'll talk about later. The Kenites were a non-Israelite community or clan who frequented the wilderness of the Sinai. Scholars generally agree that the etymology of the term Kenite implies that they were migrating smiths. In Arabic, Syriac, Palmyrene, the root Kayin can form the basis of words meaning to forge, metalworker. Tubal Cain, which is another version of Cain, a descendant of Cain, is identified as the founder of metallurgy and therefore the first metallurgist. And in the biblical text, it says he created the first city, which lets you know for a fact that he was not a real person. It's an eponymous ancestor. It's a myth. But what they're trying to talk about is that the first urbanization, the first built city was the result of metallurgy, of craftsmanship. So that's what's going on here. And let me see. Do I want to read the rest? The Kenites also wandered in the Negev, Midian, Edom, Amalek, and northern Palestine. A region was named after them. Yep, there may be an indication in Balaam's song that the Kenites dwelt in the rock, not far from Punan, one of the main sources of copper, identified with Phenon, south of the Dead Sea. This rock also appears to be a reinforcement to mountains of Edom and Midian and could denote Edomite mountain fortresses, Selah, close to rich copper deposits. The Kenites' presence in the southern regions is confirmed by the discovery of the Hebrew Astrakhan Arad, wherein the place name Kenah, as well as Ramoth Negev, is mentioned. Kenah, which was situated not far from Arad, and then it stops. And why do I have this here? It says this theory that Yahwistic cult originated in the south is supported by the thesis propounded by a number of scholars, namely that the name Yahweh emanated from the regions south of Palestine. And so the argument that Zion Lex was making is a recent and kind of newer argument, but this is still in the traditional argument that the Kenites originate from the south. And what I'm saying that what I'm arguing is that they originate from Arabia, but they were going in and out of the Sinai Peninsula and the in ancient Egypt, where they were working for the Egyptians for one point, or either was in their military or was just freely mining mines and selling ore to anybody who would purchase. And so that's what these roaming bands of metallurgists would do. He says one of the suggestions by scholars is the name Yahweh developed from a well-known Arabic interjection Yah combined with Hua. This is all folk etymology, and you can read it, but I'm skipping it. It's folk etymology. And so here's Midian, and this is the Gulf of Aqaba. And so here's the Sinai Peninsula, and here's the River Goshen from the Bible, and Ramesses. This is the Pa Ramesses or Per Ramesses, allegedly where they were enslaved, and which is, when you look at the route, for example, this is supposed to be the route that they took, out of Egypt. So they went all the way over here to Succoth, went over the Bitter Lakes, so-called Reed Sea, and Moses split the waters, and then they walked all the way down here to the south, and then went here, and then made a loop, and then went all the way here, And the Israelites and the Semites were very familiar with how to get back and forth. They've been going down here for years. So why would they come out of here and just not go straight here? They'd be there in about a month, right? And but it's a myth, so they gotta make stuff extra. But they have to in the myth, find how they were incorporated how they incorporated Yahweh. And so they had to go here in the Sinai Peninsula, in the area of where the Arabs live, because not too far here is like Mecca and Medina, all of that in this particular area. And then, so here's Edom, Moab, and the so-called Moabites. You can't say Moabite. Moabite just awakens all the Moors. Everybody want to be a damn Moabite. But anyway, and then they make their way to Israel, through Mount Nebo and Jericho. So this is what they supposed to be, here. And so what do I have here? And so what I'm saying is that in this area, Set is the deity for the borderlands. And even at this time that that allegedly the Israelites are supposed to be leaving and escaping Egyptian tyranny, all of this are colonies of ancient Egyptians as a result of the efforts of like Amenhotep III and others who pushed the boundaries in terms of colonization, so that when these Asiatics come in, that they're met with resistance here before even coming to Egypt. And so all of this was essentially really Egypt. And so, but even still, they're the Kenites are moving all up and down here and going back and forth between Arabia, Palestine and Egypt. And so what it says, this is from Seth, God of Confusion text that we mentioned earlier. It is inconceivable that the Egyptian priests who had long ceased to worship Seth in Egypt had no objection to his adoration in more distant parts. He who is in the area where a god has power must find a modus vivendi. He's observed that in Egypt itself, the places with a cult of Set lay on the border of the desert, particularly at points where important caravan routes began. Thus holds good for all the cult localities of Seth on the western bank of the Nile, which lie near the Libyan desert. It also applies to the best known town of Seth, Ombos, also a mining town where they mine copper and gold. Ombos or Nebut, meaning gold town. So people try to say that this is where you get the word Nubia from. Like Nubia is in Egypt. Ombos or Nubit is in Egypt. It is not in what is modern day Sudan. So when you talk about Nubians, you're talking about Egyptians themselves. But from the name alone, without regarding its location, one might deduce that this town was in contact with gold mines in the eastern desert. Seth might be the god of miners working in the desert and therefore be especially honored in the frontier Ombos. At any rate, Seth was worshipped especially in those places in Egypt which had connections with foreign countries or with the desert. And so I showed this map here to reinforce this notion that he was a god of the border towns. So everybody would be introduced to the spirit or would have to pay homage to Set. They would have been familiar with Set and all of his attributes and all of his names. And since he was the god of miners, who were the god of the metallurgist, and you have these Arabs moving in and out of the Sinai, in and out of Egypt, and in this place, they adopted Set as their deity. But they didn't call him Set. They called him by, Yahi or Yahoo. And so we have motive, we have place, we have context for how they adopted Yahweh out of Egypt, which explains why they can't ever come to an concerning his name, because they never look into Africa. And so let me see, the desert. Okay, so this is just a different page. So page 117, it is evident from a document such as the Papyrus Jumalak that within the individual nomes, the pantheon was again arranged in a local order, and that the order indeed is a theological one, and not only a summary of the various historical religious traditions of neighboring villages. Here, Seth, the lord of foreign lands, does not invade Egypt from Asia, but he invades the nome from the adjacent. He invades the nome from the adjacent 19 nome of Upper Egypt, which is this nome here, the Wa'ab nome, and which is kind of the home of Seth. But Ombos is also the home of Seth. But Set is a pre-dynastic Egyptian deity, and so he's not. And this goes against the comment that that Zion Lex was trying to make regarding the origin of Yahweh, trying to make it a Canaanite deity. It did not originate in Canaan. It originated in Egypt and was adopted by Semitic speakers who were part of the mines and the metallurgical tradition. There are many people called Kenites, not only just these Arabs. There were all natural Kenites in Egypt, and some of them originated in the south, and even they moved south when at the end of their the Egyptian run and the start of Meroitic kingdom, which we'll get into later. So, as Seth is the Lord of the Libyans, and Ash can be identified with him, and Seth is the Lord of the Hittites, and Teshub can be identified with him. So, Seth is the Lord of the Semites, and their principal god, Baal, can be identified with him. From the hieroglyphic way of writing Baal, one can already deduce that the god is a form in which Seth manifests himself. The divine name Baal is determined with the Seth animal. I'm citing this here to show that Seth is associated with any deity, any foreign deity that carries the same characteristics as Seth. So when he talks about Seth of the Libyans, and there's a Seth Ash. So Ash has the same characteristics as Seth among the Libyans. And so among the Hittites, Seth has the same characteristics as Teshub. And then amongst the Semites, Seth has the same characteristics as Baal. And that's why, in our other conversation, I'm showing you that why there was this relationship between Yahweh, Baal, and Set, and how even the Semites kept including attributes of Baal to Yahweh. But they're only combining these because they already recognize the conceptualizations, these merging of concepts and these characteristics that are shared between all the deities. That's how this works. So that's why, Imhotep among the Egyptians is adopted amongst the Greeks as Asclepius in terms of their deity, because they have similar and the same characteristics. This is why Zeus is identified with Amen from the Greek into the Egyptian pantheon, because they're seeing the commonalities between the two. They equate them. And so in that same manner, what I believe is that Baal is the original deity of all of these groups here, and that when the Kenites adopted Seth, they adopted Seth in his name and linked them up with Baal. And so when they settled in Canaan, they made these connections, and they did the same thing with Yahweh. But Yahweh is Set. They never used Set in Israel, Canaan. They only used the Yahweh form of the word Set. So we continue. So I show here how the GN root in Yoruba corresponds to all of these different forms here. These are all phonemes of each other. These are different forms of the same ancestral KM root that we discussed earlier. Then, of course, when the M becomes W, and then you get these forms here, Yahweh, Yahweh, of these variations of Set, right? And so I showed here, for example, Ogun, god of iron, war and hunting. Even in Egyptian, there's a K, a voice and unvoiced interchange with semantic shading. So you get Akim, bravery, brave, Valar, Okun, strength, Okoni, brave person and hero, which matches, for example, in Chikam or Egyptian, Mehu, and this is a syllabic inverse: hunter, fish spearer. And then the syllables are put correctly here: hemi, to drive back, repel; him, to strike; hemes, to slay, to mutilate. And then we have the RN forms of the word in Yoruba as well. And so what I'm showing here, Ogun, god of iron and working and hunting, and it's actually Ogun of all metallurgy, so not just iron. And so it corresponds here with Hemet, copper; Hemwoot, craftsman, right? And then the other version of Kemet, a metal instrument. Kim, a kind of a black ore. Ogun, 20, and Hasa Gama, which actually means 10. But it's the word 20, the word for 20 in Yoruba, and the word Gama and Hasa represent the end or a complete set. So for Hasa, it is two hands. 5 and 5 for 10, that means completeness. But for the Yoruba, it's two hands and 2 feet in terms of your fingers and toes. And so 20 becomes the king, the set. But they all are related to this notion of being full or complete. And that's what you see here, to be full and to fill. And I said it's the inverse, because remember, there's also a km, meaning to complete, to be full in the Egyptian language. So we do the same thing, here, uh, and just showing the GN consonant sequence corresponding to the dotted H and M in Egyptian, and how RN is another variant of that same GN sequence in Yoruba, which tells us that these are two groups who have kind of merged in the Yoruba land. And so, but also that word kin or kini is an Egyptian word. And so we have the K with the dot under it, which is a Q type sound. And so Q, brave man, elite, soldier, hero, strong warrior. And then we have these correspondences in Yoruba and in Chiluba in terms of brave person, a hero, a soldier. Heni, to conquer, to make strong, to defeat in Egyptian. Ogun, war, conflict. Ishegun, victory, conquest. In Chiluba, the K is palatalized, so we say Chimuna, beat, defeat, conquer. Kachimu, victorious. So you see the consistency here. KN, to beat, to pound up. Ken, a mallet. Goon, to pound. Gangan, drum, war drum. Khan, to hammer. Kuna, to be powder. Kuma in Chiluba, beat, knock. It's these correspondences here. So you can see Ken, force, bravery, same thing. Kenny, to be brave, to be strong, capable. And we continue here. So all of these other attributes that you find in terms of metallurgy, in terms of being able to beat metal and crafts, all of that to Ogun, or the GN sequence in the Yoruba language in comparison to Egyptian. So Ogun is cognate with QN, which we write as K dot in transliteration, and the dotted HM that we see here. So this is why I have in this thing GN equals these forms. And so, a more expansive thing will let us know, the above. And so we do the same thing here. I'll just leave this for y'all to review at your own time. Right? And so I have the sound correspondences here, and we already did in the first video, the first one on Ogun. That one's more expansive in terms of the Ogun conversation. You'll see where I match the GN with the Semitic QN that we get, Arabic Hayan and all that other kind of stuff. So that's been established. So I wanted to introduce these to show you the same thing in Egyptian. All right. So and so this is important in terms of this relationship between these Semitic speakers in mining, right? And these mobile miners and metallurgists who going around, selling ores in different spaces. And when they run out of ores, they'll go to another mining place. They just roam. They're nomads. They don't live anywhere. They're just tented folks. And so, but with the, who own those mountain mines in the Sinai were the Egyptians. And for people that don't know, the Phoenician and Hebrew alphabet is Egyptian primarily. It comes out of Egypt. So when Yahweh came on the top of the mountain and gave Moses the 10 commandments on these Hebrew tablets, he was writing, using the Egyptian script. Because as we read earlier, Set is the god of miners. And we'll get into that. And so here's another text. Oh, so I just wanted to show you this text, and just in case y'all wanted to go deeper into the origins of the alphabet in Egyptian scripts. So that, you know, the Hebrew script comes out of Egypt. So, you know, they didn't make it up, and so there was intimate relationship between those Semitic speakers who invented the 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 Phoenician alphabet, the Proto-Sinaitic script, etc. Those who I argue were the people who were already in that area, the Kenites. And so there's another text by Dr. Orly Goldwasser, and it is how the alphabet was born from hieroglyphs. And so, you know, she's kind of known in her work in semiotics. She's an Egyptologist as well as a biblical scholar. and uh and so these are kind of two of her books: Prophets, Lovers, Giraffes, Word or World Classification in Ancient Egyptian, and then From Icon to Metaphor, Studies in the Semiotics of the Hieroglyphs. So I recommend reading, you know, her works if y'all are just interested in that kind of thing. And so she has a text, excuse me, just mentioned here. So these are just, you know, show you that the Hebrew script comes out of Egypt, comes out of Africa, right? And so this is just another source. And then you have this text here, the two early alphabetic inscriptions from the Wadi El Hord, new evidence for the origin of the alphabet from the western desert of Egypt, right? And these are the authors. And so this is important. So we're looking at this map, and we can kind of see the progression of the foundational Hebrew scripts coming out of the Egyptian, and then, you know, they evolve into these forms here. But uh but these are the mining sites that you will find these scripts. So at Lahun, that you have highlighted here, Wadi El Hor, this is in here, and you notice that it's called the Kina Bend. Now, this is supposed to be a work meaning a new city, but it's built from that same root. So, you know, you can see Kenites coming out of here. So the original Kenites are here, and these are mines that these are labels for. So places with the copper mines, etc. So Bir Nasib and Serabit El Hadim in Mount Sinai. So, you know, remember that map that we saw where they came out of Parameses and went over here over the Bitter Lakes and so-called Reed Sea and split the waters, and then they walked all the way down here. And who did they meet here? They met the Kenites. And it's these Kenites in this area that originates the script. And so you have this kind of joint Kenite Egyptian workforce, and they're seeing all the Egyptian writing, and they were illiterate when it came to Egyptian hieroglyphs. And this is noted in these texts that I cited. And they, in fact, just kind of copy, and then they give their names in their language for the glyphs that they saw, and they just use the first letter in the alphabet to is to start off with the consonant sounds, and they created their writing script a little bit over time, right? So this all these locations and all these are homes of Set, because Set is the deity of miners. So you see how they're being introduced to Yahweh in all these different places, and he's the deity of the foreigners. It's easier to explain Yahweh coming out of Egypt than just running all over all willy-nilly without any context over here, because they don't ever want to look into Egypt. And so this is just a closer view of the Mount Sinai area in Bar Nasib, these mines. Remember, Mount Sinai is where they walked, and this is where he met Yahweh and the Kenites. and was introduced to Yahweh, and then they went around, they marry Yahweh, pun intended, right? And so here's the Kenabin in Egypt, right? And that Wadi El Hor. So let's go back. So what this one author or these set of authors are arguing, it says two early alphabetic inscriptions from the Wadi El Hor, new evidence for the origin of the alphabet from the western desert of Egypt. So they're arguing that the alphabet originates here in Egypt, in this place, but by Semitic speakers in a place called Kenabin. And there's a place, this is a place called Kena here, right? And so when we're talking about the Kenites, remember that that word Ken describes those metallurgists and Kim, and also with the M sound, describes all the metallurgists and miners in these areas who beat and pound mine, and also the warriors, because all the Kenites are also warriors. That's why they fought alongside Israel in this and this, because they're the ones who build the war tools. So, but this is the area that particular text is arguing it started. But those are two minor inscriptions that you have here. However, the vast majority of them will be found in the Sinai, especially in Serabit el Khadim. That's where they matured it at, right? But that text is arguing that it originates here in Wadi el Hol. And so this is just kind of a sample variation of one of the inscriptions in Wadi el Hol in that area near Thebes in the Western Desert. Here's some more, of the script, all, variations of Egyptian, the Egyptian alphabet, right? And so, here's a Sphinx from the Serabit Hathor temple. So remember that Serabit there, it's a Hathor temple. And what's interesting is that it's associated with Hathor. This is what killer, and this is what kind of seals all of this. So this is the Sphinx that was found by William Petrie and his wife. And I think it's his wife that actually pointed out the first one to point out these letters on some of the inscriptions in the Serabit Hathor temple that they were excavating. And so it says here the Sphinx from the Serabit Hathor temple, which has the dual Egyptian and Semitic inscription that equates Balat with Hathor. So remember, Hathor, which is Het Heru, is kind of the counterpart, kind of the feminine counterpart. She has two manifestations. So when she's more calm and beneficial, she's Het Heru. When she wants to be dangerous, she is Sekhmet. They're the same deity, right? But both of them are represented as either a person or a cattle with the sun or fire on their head, right? But what's interesting, remember that Baal is associated with Set for these Semites. But here we have the inscription where Balat is associated with Hathor. So they're matching the masculine and feminine with the representative deities that represent mining and metallurgy and even war and all of that other kind of stuff, and nomads, because again Heru is cattle, or she's a personification of the feminine in terms of her cattle form, right? And so this kind of stuff becomes important for the so now we're going to make it make sense in terms of West Africa when we go into Yoruba land, because there's still some debate on whether Yoruba land created metallurgy by themselves. And part of the argument is because they don't see any of the normal steps for which, coming from a stone age to um crafting metals. You just go from pottery to metal. And that is uncommon. So there's a debate on whether the Yoruba, got the metals and the skills from other places, or was this independently homegrown? Now, I argue that they got it from other places because the Kenites moved and went west and they went through Chad and landed and ended in Yoruba land. And some went further on because remember, they're constantly moving, trying to sell their ore. They're constantly looking for mining shafts and the like. And this is a tradition that in Africa that goes back 25,000, 30,000 years. And a good book to get is Dr. Charles S. Finch's A Star of Deep Beginnings. And go to the section where he's talking about the Shimshu Heru, which are the followers of Heru, which were blacksmiths who came from the south. And there's a long tradition along the Nile and even into South Africa of leveling mines, extracting ores, right? But so, along with the group, they bring with them their deities, their patron deities, and their iconography with them. And so I asked the question: Amun in Ghana, you have, Inyan Kapong, and I already said that Nyami is already a variation of Amun. And so in my latest text, I go through that and demonstrate that with ease. So, but whether they were borrowed or not, that's a different question in terms of the people in Ghana. But Inya Capone, viewed as the sun god, because Amun Ra is also a sun god, as the giver of the sun's fertility, is symbolized by the ram. Just like what you see here in the ram-headed Amun Ra, you see the sun on the ram's head, and pay attention to the collars right here. I don't know if y'all can see that on your screens because it's kind of small, but if you are on a computer screen and you have a big screen, make sure it's full screen and blow up so you can see the collar that is on Amun here, and then the cowrie shells at the bottom, right? And so this is in the Ashmolean Oxford Museum, and ancient history encyclopedia, yada yada, right? So we have Amun there. Then we have this ram amulet of Amun in Kush. It says Kushite period, dynasty 25. This is kind of a small pendant, but you can see the detail here and the snake on the head with the sun, on the top. It says possibly from Nubia, from Egypt and Sudan. Gold dimensions, da 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 da, right? Then you find Amian in Nubia. Gesa's amulet, Numian Napatan period, reign of Pianki, 743, 712 BCE. Notice again the collar, and of course the sun and the snake with the sun on top of it. So there's a relationship. So this is important because it's telling you what these symbols mean. When you're seeing these sun signs, these sun symbols, this have to deal with certain kind of craftsmanship and metallurgy. All those quote unquote sun deities are associated with some craft of metallurgy. And so here's some more ancient jewelry: the treasures of Nubian queen Amina Shaketo, Amina Shaketo or Shakato or Shaketo, I don't know how to say that, was the daughter of a queen and the wife of a brother whom she survived. Her successor was her daughter Amenetore, who is mentioned in the Bible, right? And here's one of her amulets. What do you see? The ram-headed Amun sun on top, plums at the top, and of course the snake. But more importantly, what do you see? The cowries on the collar portion of these. These are uniquely Egyptian. If you see this anywhere, you know for a fact that there was some contact with Egyptians or people trying to be Egyptians, right? So here's another melodic gold. Remember that cowrie shells come from East Africa, come from Egypt, and come from like kind of the Punt Ethiopian borders, right in that area. So they're not indigenous to West Africa. So all West African cowrie shells come from East Africa as a result of Egypt. Now, Egypt used it as money at one point, and so some believe that some of the cowrie shells came via the north, but I argue that those cowrie shells, some cowrie shells came from the south along the Sahel, but at a later period than what I'm about to talk about now. But here you see this unique type of collar, these African collars, but at the bottom is the cowrie shells, right? And so this is a human-headed almond, but nonetheless, same thing. So I wanted to point this out: gold amulet, cowrie shells, right? And so, from this link here, the presence of cowries in Africa can be traced back as early as the 8th century. They came from the Maldive Islands in the Indian Ocean to West Africa through North Africa to the Middle Niger in the 11th century. So this lets you know if you see cowrie shells that this is from between the 8th and 11th centuries AD. Spreading southwards to Guinea forest and then to Niger Delta. There were two types of cowries in circulation at the time. Cypri annulus, a larger species which was preferred in the west, while the east was more inclined to a smaller species called Cypri moneta, uh, moneta or moneta. And both are species of sea snails and marine gastrop mollusks in the da da da. Who cares, right? So just showing you that when you see cowrie shells, it can be dated. We know where they come from. They come via Egypt, but we can see that already, even before that time, in the BC period, that the Egyptians already had the cowrie shells, right? And this site makes it seem like it comes from the island in the Indian Ocean. It comes on the edge, all up on the Red Sea and all of that. So, um, but yeah, so we have this text from W.D. Wallace, an introduction to anthropology, says cowries serve as the medium of exchange in Dahomey. These have been introduced from the East Coast, the shellfish from which they are made not being found on the West Coast. Although Egypt has provided almost the earliest evidence of the cultural use of this money, cowrie shells never played any prominent part in the lower Nile Valley. The Indians who traded with Egypt used cowries for money. The Chinese, who also traded with Egypt at a very remote period, used tortoise, probably cowrie shells for money. This system dates back as far as the 28th century BC. So, that explains why you find in Moreau at least the cultural use of it. So, and these are two sources that are being referenced here, right? So here we have Queen Kandasi, her necklace. And it's kind of, because I guess how they took the photo, it's kind of hard to see, but these are cowries at the end of this spread, this necklace. And so note, I'm saying all of this for a reason. I'm re-emphasizing all of this for a reason. So now, when we come to Benin, right, in Yoruba land, you find these same articulations, and these are metals. So you have the same folks who came out of Kush, who came with their guild and was part of the beginnings of the because this here is the part of that Noke the note creations and things out of the terracotta. But notice the representations of where the cowrie shells are supposed to be. They don't use cowrie shells because cowrie shells hasn't been brought over to West Africa yet. So the people who were designing this had the designs in mind, but they had no cowrie. They didn't bring cowrie shells with them. So they had to get creative and create these things here, right? And so this is a ram-headed pendant 17th, 19th century Edo's people, right? So this is the between the 16 and 18 hundreds, right? And so you see, instead of cowries, they loop them. They make these loops here, but the same collar, same ram head, right? And these are metals. So remember the argument that the Yoruba, the reason why there's a debate is because there's no intermediate stage. They just go from pottery to metals. And so they're wondering where they're trying to make the argument that if it comes from somebody else, they're looking into Berbers via Niger. But the Berbers were not creating this. This is all Kushite stuff, where Amen was the principal deity, and where you see these representations all throughout its history. And so when those Kenites coming out of Egypt, because remember, Kenite is an occupational title that certain groups have used in terms of their identity, but it can apply this as is nothing racial about it. So there was Kenites all up and down Egypt, and some went into Meroe. And so you see this plaque with ram head, Nigeria, Benin, metal collection number 12351. Such a U-shaped pendants were worn by the Oba and important dignitaries attached to the belt around the waist for comparable objects. See, blah, 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 blah. Same thing here. And so it would be interesting to think that the Yoruba and Benin people would just get created. They just by osmosis, the ancestors said, I want y'all to design this stuff and use a technique of casting metals and things that y'all never used before. And I want y'all to create something that looks just like what we find in ancient Egypt and in Kush. But it's independently thought of without any kind of connection whatsoever, because you always find these individuals who keep trying to deny that people from the Nile Valley made their way into places like Yoruba land and into Benin and into Ghana and places like this. They don't understand the culture of roaming nomadic metallurgists that roam all up and down Africa in the Middle East. And the way that we can tell that they're bringing stuff is because you can also identify the objects by name. So here is that thing from the 1600s. So this is from the 1500s. And they're getting creative. They don't have the shells itself, so they're casting this stuff in metals in the same type of fashion that you would see in the Nile Valley itself, or in Sudan, in Meroe, with the Kushites, right? And so this is found in Lagos in the 1500s. And so when you see, for example, in Egyptian, Gin for copper objects, remember in the Wadi El Hol, like that's a copper mine. And in around there is Kini and Guinea. These are words, Gin, copper objects, Ginu, metal pots. And so when you have Ogun, Orisha blacksmith, and the Fang, Gun, Vununa blacksmiths, the Ham, a group of Chadic speakers who live in Nigeria, Kuno, the evil spirit who built the iron furnaces, Hassa, Makeri. It was the N is rotarized between the two vowels for them. I mean, between the two vowels for them. But Fan, Gan, iron, Arabic, Kayun, smiths, Kayin, Hebrew, Kayin, Cain. They can't define Kayin in Hebrew because Cain didn't originate with the Hebrews. It was part of this ancient, deity and metallurgical thing that originated in the Green Sahara, which found its central expression in Egypt and spread out from there. So it's no reason, is no coincidence that you find these copper metal objects, named basically Ogun in Kemet. And so when you want to talk about whether there was travel or whatnot from ancient Egypt, this is why linguistics is so important to the conversation. And so this comes from that book. Well, it's another book, but I think it's in here as well. That from Dr. Lam, where because he discusses the oral tradition of 6 migrations out of Egypt that ended in that ended up in Senegal. And the first wave was the Ja Ogo. The word Ogo is the word for metallurgy, for blacksmith. And they were talking about it was first the blacksmiths who made their way via North Africa and settled into what is now Senegal. And with them, they brought the words from ancient Egypt having to deal with that particular trade. So you have in Egyptian jis, knife, mijis, knife. In Wolof, jasi, blade, dagger, hatchet, das, to sharpen. For correspondence is jim, to pierce, to penetrate, jam, to stab, puncture, prick, tattoo. Dim, a worm, digi, a sacred snake. Wolof, John, snake. Assimilation of the N, to the first consonant. That in terms of the nasalization process from M to N. This is how you tell when there's migrations. You have in Middle Egyptian, nam, knife, for butchering. In Igbo, nima, ma, knife. In Yoruba, obe, knife. Middle Egyptian, bia, mineral or meteoric origin, or metal, copper. And then you have bin, pet. And it's really or that with that's a phrase that means metal from the sky, iron. And then you have, rebu, branding iron, right? Among the Igbo, they have this bell. And so I'm going to have to do in another presentation because I don't have time now on the role amongst the Kenites in terms of not only being metallurgists, but being musicians. And so you have among the Igbo, the Ogene, which is a style of Igbo music consisting of and taking its name from the Ogene instrument, which is a large metal bell. The Ogene instrument has historically been made by the Igbo people of Nigeria. It is one of the most important metal instruments of the people. Wikipedia, right? Ogene Indi Igbo. And so for those of you who are, practitioners of Ifa, we have this with Ogun as well. And so we have the Kenites in West Africa. So for amongst the Hebrews, they were known as the Hakkeni, or therefore the Kenites. And among the Ibira, they are known as Igini. They are a caste of despised smiths who do iron working over a wide area of Ibira country, southwest of Niger, the Niger Benue complex or confluence. right? Because Kenites move. There's, that's not the only area with Kenites. In Yoruba land to this day, the Igini, I'm on the Ham, I'm on the joke false Kuno, false peripatetic or peripatetic blacksmith. That's their Ogun. Ogun comes and travels from the east. And along with certain aspects of Ifa, which I dealt with in the beginning of Illusion Volume 2. And so, like, with this is a journal article that talks about these so-called ghost lineages, right? And so I'll read it, but I'm using this to make a point here. So, our knowledge of ancient human population structure in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly prior to the advent of food production, remains limited. Here we report genome-wide DNA data from 4 children, 2 of whom were buried approximately 8,000 years ago, and 2 3,000 years ago from Shum Laka, which is in Cameroon. One of the earliest known archaeological sites within the probable homeland of the Bantu language group, one individual carried the deeply divergent Y chromosome haplogroup A00, which today is found almost exclusively in the same region. However, the genome-wide ancestry profiles of all 4 individuals are most similar to those of present-day hunter-gatherers from Western Central Africa, which implies that populations in Western Cameroon today, as well as speakers of Bantu languages from across the continent, are not descended substantially from the population represented by these 4 people. We infer an Africa-wide phylogeny that features widespread admixture and 3 prominent radiations, including one that gave rise to at least 4 major lineages deep in the history of modern humans. So what they're suggesting here is that if these 4 genetic profiles that we have are any indication of what's going on, that the so-called Bantu speakers in Cameroon, in Central Africa, they don't originate there, which is very important for the whole Bantu migration hypothesis, because they argue that they come out of Cameroon. Now, keep in mind, this is only one small area, and Cameroon is very big. So, more research would have to be done before we come into any kind of conclusion. But it's suggestive, for what I'm about to say. So now keep that in mind. So these people, what they're saying is that they're kind of the small hunter-gatherer kind of pygmy type folks that was in the area. And so Bantu, these taller Bantu people come a little later. So this becomes very important because Cheikh Anta Diop in The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality, page 179, he says, from what we know about archaeology of South Africa, where humanity seems to have been born, from what we know about Nubian civilization, probably the oldest of all, from what we know about the prehistory of the Nile Valley, we can legitimately assume that the Great Water is none other than the Nile. No matter where we collect legends on the genesis of a Black African people, those who still remember their origins say they came from the East and that their forebears found pygmies in the country. Dogon and Yoruba legends report that they came from the East, while those of the Fang, who as recently as the 19th century had not yet reached the Atlantic coast, indicate the Northeast. And it goes on and on and on. But I wanted to highlight that particular area there. He says that, his argument that folks who claim, who still understand their oral tradition and say they came from the East, they say that when they came here, that their ancestors met pygmies in the country. Just as we did with the genetic study here. So it's no coincidence that you would have these such veneration. So on the left-hand side is what Henry Druel calls the child of the Yoruba. god Obatala from Ile Ife. This is a terracotta. So Nigeria dated between 1000 and 1500 AD, right? And so you notice that it is of a quote unquote pygmy, which we call the Batwa, right? And so, fat cheeks, shorter stature. You really can't see much of it, but you can tell it's still shorter stature because he has no neck. And tongue sticking out with the chain around him with the ancestral Egungun skull. You find the same thing in ancient Egypt. This is the god Bes, who Chief X initially named himself after. Doesn't even know that Bes is West African, because you even still have God mentioned as Bes in Cameroon. Matter of fact, Dr. Om Indiji, who's going to be one of the presenters on the 15th, or either on the 15th or the 16th of February for the West Africa and Beyond conference, he's going to be talking about, Bess still alive and well in Cameroon, right? So you see the same type of iconography: short stature, fat cheeks, tongue sticking out, mouth open, and egungun chain around the neck. Where are they getting this from? Is it just coincidence, again, in the same area, that they are designing the same kind of concept? Like they just by some method of osmosis, just out of nowhere, just say, I'm just going to create this, and it's just going to happen to look just like what we find in ancient Kemet, right? And you see that this is part of a tradition here. So this is from Benin. It's a court dwarf, and which were occasionally attributed with supernatural abilities, and some of them made great contributions to the kingdom. Dwarf bronzes often adorn the altars of their kings. Dwarf bronzes, metals. As this stuff is carved out. So what do you see here? The mouth is closed, but still a pygmy, still the ancestral skull necklace. And you notice that on both the best, see this one, the bottom portion had broken off. So we don't have the bottom beyond, the top part of the chest and arms for the one found in Nigeria. But we see here that not only do they have the pendant skull necklace, but they have this little waist bead around the stomach for the Batois. So this is Benin. Same thing. So even though we don't have the tongue sticking out and mouth wide open, you still see the ancestral necklace with the ancestral skull attached to it, with also around the stomach, and in this one more clothes dropping towards the hips, and bow-legged. That's another thing. So I don't know if you can really tell the bow-leggedness on Bess right there, but this is the same cultural representation. And then we go further down into Cameroon, and we see the pygmy. This is supposed to be a baby version of it, but still no necklace, but they still got something wrapped around the neck, and they still have the belly waist rope as well. And so you're seeing all these representations. They're all concentrated in one area. And so even Graham Kona, in the text Nigerian Prehistory and Archaeology, it says it does seem that, at least in part, the Yoruba did have some sort of Sudanic origin and were not originally all forest zone dwellers. Thus, the modern Yoruba are very likely a composite product resulting from the intermixing of people already in the forest with others emanating from the Sudanic zone. Right? And this would correspond with the kind of oral traditions that some of the Yoruba people came from Egypt and Sudan. And there's also some correlations with the Roman style slabs that they have, because that's the exact kind that they had in Kush. And so we know the route that they took. And this is why I argue for them, the origin is Kush and Meroe, and by proximity, Egypt, all regardless Nile River in the Sudan, and then move west, and not from the top, not from the Delta and then through Morocco and then all the way down. And so you see in the terracotta art, again, the Amun here with the kind of the collars and then the strings coming down, and then the cowrie shell representations down here, even though they don't have real cowrie shells. And you see this and so this is from the 11th or 12th century CE. So that's, the 1000 and 1100 BCE. I mean, excuse me, BCE, AD, right? And so here's another color. You see these, like, these are unique. You just don't think of these. Like, what is somebody in the forest? Why do they have these? In terms of the collars, what does that serve? Where does that originate? This doesn't come from Berbers. Why this stress on ram heads that you see here? And here's a Hotep offering slab. And so, as Modupe Odeoye would argue, for example, like one group would be the Fulani, and you know them by various different names, and they've been moving around since the Middle East, and the top here going through the Sinai, trading, metallurgists. So you have a different group of folks coming from this end. And you see these kind of you see in pre-dynastic times, these roaming, pastoralists, and then in some of the signs that you see later on in ancient Kemet. This is from Wadi Kash, Upper Egyptian ruler with red crown, 4000 BC, right? We also see, these scepters, these are wasp scepters that you have in hand. So this is 3500 BCE, Hyrcanopolis tomb, right? And then, of course, you always see Seth, who's the patron of the pastoralists. And you'll see a lot of people with this wasp scepter, but you'll definitely see, because this is a pastoralist emblem. And so he's the god of the desert and the desert pastoralist. And so I have to ask this question for all of y'all, and I know it's going to be a pause, and we're coming to the end of this. So if I ask this question, you see these wasp scepters. There's 3 different wasp scepters, right? Or 3 different groups of wasp scepters. One is one. So if you're looking at what you see here on the screen, which one, A, B, or C, from left to right, is the Egyptian one? And so I will wait 1 minute for y'all to hear what I'm saying because of the time lag. And I want y'all to put in the chat, what do you think, which ones you think are the actual ancient Egyptian wasp staffs and which ones are not? Well, I get some tea. So I see C's, I see 1A, I see 1B. So C seems to be winning out so far in the chat. I'll wait about 30 more seconds, see if anybody else. So Collie Hurst says B. Mario Foster say B it is. Right? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and answer now. So these staffs of authority, these wall staffs, A is actually the Egyptian staff. You can find it in the Cairo Museum. But B and C are found in West Africa. So one is a Fulani or a Pool staff found in Senegal. And then the other one, C, that everyone said is from Nana Kana of Ghana. It's in the Lafon Museum in Dakar, right? And say here, notice the jackal head on the one from Ghana and the hook at the bottom of the one from Senegal, right? And so these things are not, you just don't independently make these. These are inspired, and these were captured and collected, before there and these were made in things before any kind of Egyptology departments. Can't nobody say that some wandering Berbers were, brought these staves and like that's not the case. This is Egypt in West Africa amongst the roaming, pastoralist who Seth is their god and their emblem. That's why you see this here, because Seth is the deity of miners and metallurgists, as well as the frontiers, as well as the god of storms and illness and viciousness. All these things are connected. So when you have these individuals who will sit here and argue that there is no connection with ancient Egypt and Kemet in West Africa, they don't know jack. They don't read anything. They're just making up stuff and just don't want to admit that they don't know enough. They don't study enough. And I could go on, but this is just, a little bit of, that. So that's the second part of the conversation. So I wanted to kill two birds with one stone. Of course, Lion, Zion, Lex, and then some other folks who don't want to concede on the relationship with West Africa and ancient Egypt. And this conversation links both of them. So by addressing Zion Lex, it helps to put in the context in terms of the Kenites and their travels throughout the Middle East and in West Africa, and the material culture, as well as other aspects of the culture that they brought with them, and how they integrate and was synthesized in every location in which they went, and how they picked up stuff and moved along with it. And so these bands have been traveling for hundreds of thousands of years. And so it's just these kind of minor things that you just got to know about Africa when you're making these or having these conversations. So I saw about like 100 chat things when I came back, so I won't be able to go through each one of these. And Dr. Duarte says you're bringing a lot to the table. Of course, this is the Mbongi. This is why I don't have shouting matches on my thing. So we have enough time to go through this. So I make sure that I give y'all source material that y'all can study on your own, and then I show you how I put all those fragments together to create a more seamless narrative. So the Oshun Orisha is the Heru deity. I don't know about that, but says kryptonite to any Hebrew debate is Asherah. Indeed, I think ain't that's the wife of Yahweh. Eshu Orisha is the Shu Kemet deity. Nope. He says, this gives me an opportunity to try something, because StreamYard has a new feature, and y'all let me know if y'all can hear this, because you can now play some background music. We can't add any background music, but it allows us to play some background music. So I'm gonna see if it plays. Can y'all hear it? So like if I'm talking, I can have some cool background music, so this is the lo-fi edition. So maybe if I want to talk smooth, y'all, we do a poetry night. And we're like, boom. If they had a good hip hop track, we could have a freestyle contest, on the channel, in the future. So can y'all hear it? You said, yep. Yep. I'm gonna test it out one day in terms of a conversation, but that's just a new feature for the program. So I'll deal with that at some time in another show. But let me see what y'all saying in these comments. Israelites are the Arabs. So glad we have this other saying. So the fast Israelites, yeah, Israelites and the Arabs, they're the same. That's why I like when you see these super white versions in European, they're Ashkenazis and people from Russia and all that who adopted the culture. But the true Palestinians and Israelites, they're Arabs. They're the same. Their language, their group just split in terms of the language. And so they're no different in terms of distance than Igbos and Yoruba people. Let me see. No one in the Bible, Torah, and Quran ever existed on the planet Earth. No archaeological evidence site exists, and it's an allegory. Read Galatians. It's a story, not real history to enslave blacks. Yeah, that's what an eponymous ancestor is. It's just a mythological source that unites people that claim a connection in that. So you have people saying we're the descendant from Adam. Ancient Egyptians did the same thing. So you have people who are descendants from Heru, people who are descendants from Set. And matter of fact, when they talk about the people who are descended from Set, I need to find that text. If Ujalu's listening, if you remember, please let me know what it is. But it's a text that is talking about who they're descended from. So Heru is talking about the Egyptians, the Remech, and the Nehesi, the people in Sudan. So they all are the children and were born of Heru, but the people who were born of Set are like these other two groups of Asiatics and the Libyans or whatnot. And so they let you know who belongs to who. But so that's neither here nor there. Let me see. Sign showing that West African nation. Indeed. He said, why are you calling Yoruba traditional practices Ifa? Orisha predate Ifa. At the Yoruba Museum in Havana, Cuba, Orunmila is depicted as a pharaoh. Maybe, but I've already dealt with the Ifa question, and I argue that Ifa comes from the East as well. And I make that argument in Aluja, but it comes later. There's an indigenous version of it, but the name itself and the markings more than likely comes through the East by people who were Arabized, and so when certain groups of Yoruba say that they come from Medina and Mecca and all this other, that may be true. Like people got to understand that when they're talking about the migrations, they're not talking about every single person that is identify themselves, for example, as Wolof or da da da. Others don't have that ancestry, but what you have, there's no such thing as a pure ethnic group. What happens, what makes an ethnic group is that different groups of people over time come and merge, and then they converge on a common culture and language, and then they create these mythological ancestors from which they all derived, and then now they become distinct from some other group of people. But no, there's no such thing as a pure ethnic group. And so with that comes these stories of one aspect, no matter how big or small, may come from this area while everybody else doesn't. But they're coming in and then they all intermarry and have children. It's just like African Americans. We all aren't, Yoruba. We aren't Edo people. all of us aren't archons, et cetera, et cetera. A circumstance of history forced 52 groups to come together, and now we are the African Americans, and our genes are mixed up. We speak a colonial language, and we have created a culture from a combination of things that come from various different places. And that's what happens. It happened in ancient Kemet. It happened in Israel, as we saw here with the Kenites and the Israelites. They come and merge, and now we take on Yahweh, and we merge it with El, and we confuse everybody else in the world, and all this other kind of good stuff. There's no such thing as a pure ethnic group anywhere. Let's see. He said, "Yep, Oduduwa is always depicted as an invader. May have come out of Chad. This is an interesting. What is the significance of rams? Please, Family Fresh, refresh me. All right. Yeah, I mean, there's many different things. The ram is also a symbol of Amma, which we also equate with Amen among the Dogon. Like, that isn't coincidence. Like, this is, one could argue, like some people try to argue, that all of the similarities is the result of a common ancestral tradition and the interactions in the Green Sahara. And then when everybody spread, they took it with them. And in the case in what I just demonstrated, that's impossible, because there's no metallurgy in the Green Sahara, and it's impossible when you combine all of these different things to make the argument they just either independently created these things, and or it was diffused as a result of coming out of the Green Sahara before desertification. And so finally some good straightforward information, no cussing, no yelling, no BS and laughing and confusion, and where is your source, and that's pseudo, none of that. That's what we do on this channel. How you don't migrate and be on a continent for millions of years. Look at your own continent. Exactly. Let me see. Look at the country you live in. People change location all the time. I discussed that in the text in the Luja Volume 2. And I give good examples. He says, can Chief X or the pseudo killers disprove anything in this presentation? Of course not. But what they'll do is just deny it. And then we'll have a long, worn out conversation based on cognitive dissonance. And it's just going to be, bothersome. He said, is that a Malcolm X t-shirt? It's a t-shirt that I designed. And so I'll have these available sometime beginning this summer that you can purchase them. So they look like this. And actually, in the new version of the design, I reversed it. So you'll have the Malcolm X, the ones that'll be coming out for sale. You'll have the Malcolm X inside the parentheses, and then on the other side, it'll have the red, black, and green Africa. So for those of you who are into mathematics, hopefully you get that. So when we talk about f of x equals red, black, and green. So that's what you see on this shirt here, right? So then my brand in the back is titled Rude Boy Juju. So you probably seen my other shirt, Black is Not a Race, It's a Vibe. And then, of course, you see the Ba and Kole shirts. I renamed African Americans. And then, of course, you can always get the Kimoyo shirts as well. So, we gonna brand this African consciousness. So everywhere you go, people, be asking questions of what's that mean? And then now you can enlighten them. And so, big things are going in the near future. They'll just call it pseudo and it's crazy. I can't believe. Yep, you already know the blueprint. Says, I'm listening. I know the Book of Gates that touch on set foreigners, Amu and Heru, Remech, and Nehesu. Yeah, I think that's it, the Book of Gates. We'll probably have to do an analysis of that text and see what's going on. And last time I checked, is in life a psycho. Exactly. So, I'll be ending this. I've already did a show earlier and I'm going on 3 hours now. So unless somebody is having an after party somewhere, I am going to end here. So I do appreciate each and every one of you for joining the conversation. Please continue to support the efforts. And, we're still doing fundraising, still got a significant amount to go in terms of the upcoming trip and the upcoming film. As a matter of fact, I just got the stabilizer in the mail. So when I'm shooting, I won't be shaking everywhere. And that was a problem the last time that I was there shooting. So there's a lot of footage I can't use from the last trip because I'm like this. It looks like that, you're holding it steady. You think you're holding it steady, but it's when you see the footage, it's like this. And so, but yeah, so we getting ready to get it in. And so I do appreciate each and every one of you. Make sure that you can like the video and that you share the video. You keep the conversation going, and we are out. Peace.
That's on my mind, and I would like to let them out. Look, I see reality breaking down all my fantasies. It would be nice if I at least had one fantasy. That neutrality about to take a terabyte from the American apple pie, better get a slice. It's kinda scary the way that this life is moving on. Marvin's doing backflips inside his grave, what's going on? We have head-on collisions, not seeing another's vision. Maybe that's the reason why some colors fit the description. A lot of relationships need life rafts, sinking ships. I guess you just can't have only one like potato chips. I would love for you to listen with an open heart, but would you really even hear me if it's torn apart?